European countries love doing very little for Ukraine and congratulating themselves loudly for it. The latest offender is Latvia, whose massive contribution will be likely outshadowed by, well, you guys. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about this, plus Europeans' other milquetoast commitment to Ukraine's defense. Okay, so this is one of those stories that really annoys me. Latvia literally makes the freaking news, providing over 1,000 drones to Ukraine, guys. They're going to transfer over 1,000, quote, combat drones of various types to Ukraine through an international drone coalition. This according to their defense minister. Drones are produced in Latvia, administered through a UK and Latvian-led drone coalition, aiming to boost Ukraine's arsenal of UAVs. Latvia previously announced it will provide an additional 20 million euros to the coalition in 2025. Right? Now, here's the thing. Right? I want to point out that Latvia is, by proportion of its GDP, considered one of Ukraine's biggest supporters, providing 0.25% of its GDP every year. In contrast, the U.S., less than even 0.1% of its GDP is provided in aid to Ukraine, right? But what I think is more interesting is, again, the contrast here. And there's a recognition, right? Ukraine domestically is making about 1 million drones in 2024, and that Ukrainian drones represent 96% of all UAVs used by the military in that year. And this makes sense, right? Ukrainian labor is just going to be cheaper than anyone else's. And frankly, the Ukrainians have the most number of people who are capable of rolling out these drones. And this, I think, is kind of annoying because literally 1,000 drones is a drop in the bucket. And why do I say this? Because, to give you some context, we've done a number of fundraisers with Ukraine Aid Ops, and I've been there with them delivering drones to these units on the front line, and they are essential to the war effort. But we've raised so far almost $50,000, and we're only halfway there. And for context, right, in this fundraiser alone, it's only been going on like 2 weeks or so, well, our $50,000, right? And as we talk about, each drone is going to run you about $250, meaning that we've already raised a quarter of the entire country of Latvia's drone contributions in this fundraiser alone. The link is in the description, by the way, if you want to help it out. There's a bunch of cool swag. There's also a chance, to give a large donator a bottle of sparkling wine from the Bakhmut champagne factory, which was destroyed in the Battle of Bakhmut. So I say this because this is one of those trends that sort of bothers me. Now, credit where credit's due. Latvia's provision of $125 million and 20 million euros. But sometimes, and this is sort of one of my gripes here, right, is that on one hand, a lot of aid provided to Ukraine is, people love to tout the big number. Right, the biggest number they can mathematically come up with. But for example, in EU funds that aid Ukraine, about 70% of them are spent taking care of Ukrainian refugees who are outside the country. And the Ukrainian government would prefer those people to be in the country, both economically providing for the country, right, providing additional economic revenues, but also those people, some of them, about a million of them, are men. Are military-age men who could be or should be in the fighting. And so this sort of thing is like, okay, you're supporting Ukraine sort of, but the money isn't going to them. And when I see these the delta between these numbers of 1,000 combat drones and the amount, 20 million euros, I'm really skeptical, given, again, that if you can produce them for, let's say they're twice as expensive as a Ukrainian drone. Let's say they're $1,000 a pop. Well, you've only explained $1 million of that funding. And so this kind of weird government math just is something that as time goes on, I get more and more suspicious of, right? And this is a really strange trend. I don't know how else to tell you. But one of the things, guys, is that I am totally independent, right? And that's what I'm so proud of, is that I don't take money from governments. I don't take money from major media organizations. I barely have sponsors at this point. So I rely on you guys to keep me independent. You can do it on combatvetnews.com. It's my version of Patreon. Twice a week, videos drop, uncensored combat footage sent to me from, in many cases, units at the front line that I met with on my trip to Ukraine. So check it out. The link to that is also in the description, as well as a link to the fundraiser. Okay. Here's another example of this sort of behavior that just drives me crazy. Ukraine scores $156 million for defense industry from European allies. Now, don't get me wrong, $156 million is not chump change, especially in Ukraine, where that can go a long way. But for context, the United States has provided in total about $150 billion in aid to Ukraine. And some of that is weird Pentagon math, which is also like you got to take with a grain of salt. But the U.S. has provided, like 1,000 times this amount of aid. And so this is why, again, I'm not saying it's bad, but what I'm saying is a lot of these countries could do more, right? And here's the thing, is that if you're France, well, France is actually a bad example. If you're Denmark, right? France is a great example, right? France, $30 million to enhance Ukraine's security and defense capabilities. Sure. But here's the thing to ask yourself. The French economy, one of the G7 countries, one of the 7 largest economies in the whole world, does it have, what's its other national security commitment? Fighting in Mali, right? Like, listen, the fighting in Mali is a far cry from the essential security operations of resisting Russian aggression in Eastern Europe. Because remember, it's like an hour flight from Paris to Kiev. It's the equivalent of the distance equivalent of fighting in LA, and you live in like Las Vegas. Okay. They're so close together. Like, let me see if I can actually get this scaled up here. Right. So Paris to Kiev, Google Maps, just doing its thing, right? It's about 2,400 kilometers. So if we were to do, right, we'll do New York to LA. And that is about math. Come on, Google, you can do it. You can do it. Google's thinking hard, lads. Google's thinking hard. It's giving it to me in miles. So it's the equivalent of, if you lived in New York, it's like the equivalent of having the fighting in like Denver or Omaha, right? Like pretty disturbingly close. And I point this out because I think France provides way less support than it otherwise could, even as a portion of its GDP, right? This is, in a lot of ways, a European conflict and a threat primarily, first and foremost, to European security. And so when the U.S. does vastly, vastly more than Europe, it really leaves you scratching your head a little bit, particularly because so many European countries provide lip service. They say things about how essential it is that Ukraine wins. Their talk is up here, right? And then their actions are like down here. Whereas the U.S., we have a large portion of our political establishment that says, aiding Ukraine, it's important, or a lot of them say, no, it's not important, but our aid is through the roof relative to Europe. It sort of drives me crazy. Again, is there some sort of larger meta thing here? I don't know. That's really all I had for today. Thank you guys so much. Hit that subscribe button. Thanks to folks like Bill Collier, Robert Colburn, Gars Marnie, Gina Cresta, Chris Gorsuch, Francis Karis, L90, Petra Taruru, all of our Lieutenant tier members. Couldn't do it without you guys. I appreciate you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.